Welcome to Eye on Africa, France 24's program focused on the continent. I'm Charlie James, and here's what's coming up. The death toll rises in Mozambique as aid remains blocked by Cyclone Kenneth's rains. We speak to an NGO director on the ground about the storm's impact. Negotiations start again between Sudanese opposition leaders and the ruling military council. At the ongoing sit-in, our correspondent got protesters' reactions to the talks. And 25 years after apartheid, South Africa still struggles with how to teach its history to children. The subject isn't mandatory, but the lessons continue to resonate. The water is still rising in northern Mozambique. Damage from Cyclone Kenneth is compounding as residents and emergency workers brace for violent floods. The death toll has gone up to 38 people, according to Mozambique's government. Claire Muffson has the latest on the efforts to get aid to those most in need.
Water on the left side of the road and water on the right side, and just enough space in the middle to walk away from the flooded area. Leave Pemba and the devastated villages nearby, try and find higher ground. That's the goal for tens of thousands of residents, because more rain is coming.
We are very concerned because the water levels keep rising. It keeps raining since yesterday, and a lot of people have been displaced from their homes. We have 700,000 people who are at risk after the cyclone, and 200,000 people who are at very high risk.
Brazilian troops helped rescue trapped residents as the UN pledged to release $13 million in emergency funds for Mozambique and Comoros. But rain and flooding has submerged roads and grounded aid flights, leaving many stranded without food or shelter. And that is not the only concern. The cyclone wiped out water and sanitation facilities, so authorities are bracing for a possible cholera outbreak. Mozambique has faced flooding before, but this year is the first time in recent history that it's been hit by two cyclones in one season. This is what the northern coast looks like now: 35,000 homes damaged or destroyed. Images that resemble the tragedy in southern Mozambique 6 weeks ago after Cyclone Idai, when 600 people died in the flooding that followed the storm. Forecasters say that twice as much rain could fall in the aftermath of Kenneth, raising fears of a similar scenario.
And for the latest on the situation on the ground in Mozambique, we're joined by Barbara Cruspan. She is country director for the nonprofit health organization Solidar Med. Barbara, thanks so much for being with us. You're in Pemba, the regional capital. Are you still preparing for the worst to come, or is it about damage control right now?
Hello, and thank you very much for having me in your program. I would say it's both. On one hand side, we are preparing still for more to come. I just got an information that there is more flooding to come in the next days because it's still raining heavily. And you can imagine, if you look at the densely populated Pemba, we will have to be prepared for cholera outbreaks, but also increase in other diseases like malaria, typhus, and dengue. But then also we have to think of people with chronic diseases like HIV, because if they lose everything in their homes, they will also lose their medicine. So that is one thing. But then also another still burning issue is that the districts of Ibo and Kisanga are not yet assessed properly. We don't have proper data, so we will still get more information of what happened there. And then another issue is, as it is raining, people need shelter, they need water and food. So we are in kind of damage control, but there will still more to come.
This is unprecedented in Mozambique's modern history, at least. Two huge storms like this in under 6 weeks. How has the first storm, Idai, affected the response to Kenneth right now?
There were lessons learned, very well, lessons learned for example, the warning system functioned well. We were warned quite ahead of the storm and ahead of the cyclone, and people managed to get to safe ground. But then after the hitting of the cyclone, many people went back to their homes and were then hit by the water to come. So it was a lesson learned, but probably not 100%. On the other hand, what we learned is about logistics. There were clusters already in place in Beira, in Sofala, and these experiences were brought up to Cabo Delgado. Another, I would say, advantage, if that is possible to say something like this in such a tragic situation, is that the humanitarian organizations, the big ones, are already in the country. So many of them, they came now up from Beira to Cabo Delgado to help here. But if you consider that Mozambique is one of the 10 poorest countries, then you can imagine that we are struggling in general.
You mentioned that you're expecting there to be a cholera outbreak, and this was something that we saw following Cyclone Idai as well. Can you just explain why exactly cholera is able to really flourish in these floodwaters?
It is a tropical region, so the area is quite warm or even hot. This is a good ambience for all the diseases to spread easily. That is one thing. Then the second point, it's water. It's a waterborne disease. If you have a poor hygiene, then diseases can spread easily. Then you can also imagine the flooded latrines. It's hand-dug latrines mostly, so all the feces and all the debris there. It's mixing now with street water, with rainwater, with drinking water. So this is a very bad mixture of disease like cholera. So it's very easy to spread.
And Barbara, quickly, can you just explain for our viewers, what do aid groups like yours really need right now? Is it more resources or manpower?
I would say it's everything. It happened last Thursday. You can say it's quite some days which passed, but you can also imagine that there was no access to Pemba. It's only today that the flights returned. There is not enough manpower. The health systems, the public works system are understaffed. They have been before, and even now more. If we consider such a tragedy, supplies are still very much in need. But first of all, what we need is very clear data about what is needed and where it is needed, and then things have to be shipped or brought or flown there as quickly as possible.
Barbara Crispin with Solidarmed, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and for your work there in Mozambique. Next to Burkina Faso, where unidentified gunmen attacked a Protestant church on Sunday, killing a pastor and 5 worshippers. It happened in the northern commune of Silgadji, not far from the volatile border with Mali. The government says this is the first attack to target a Christian church in the majority Muslim country. Historically, religious groups have lived together peacefully there. But Burkina Faso is experiencing an upsurge in Islamist violence this year as extremist groups based in Mali seek to extend their influence. Talks resumed Monday between Sudan's protest leaders and the ruling military council. Disagreements over the transition to civilian rule had resulted in a breakdown of negotiations. But the committee reformed to work on a joint civilian-military council, and an agreement would pave the way for a civilian administration. As the talks are being held in the presidential palace in Khartoum, protesters continue to rally outside the army headquarters. Our correspondent, Julia Steers, sent us this report from the site of the sit-in.
A spokesman for the military spoke publicly here in Khartoum on Monday evening after wrapping up a meeting between the military and protest leaders. He said that there was progress made during that meeting, and he called on the protest movement several times to unblock roads and bridges here in the capital, Khartoum. The main sticking point of the meeting remained unresolved, and that is the level of representation from both sides, civilian and military. He really dug in when he said that the military still felt it was necessary to have 7 representatives from their side and 3 civilian representatives on this joint council that is expected to lead the country until elections can be held. Now, the 7-to-3 ratio is extremely unlikely to be accepted by protest leaders and participants here at the sit-in. The protest leaders did present the military with a document for their vision going forward. That will be reviewed on Tuesday. But what's clear for now is that people will remain at the sit-in until they get what they want. And what they've insisted they wanted all along is a civilian-led government.
And finally on the program, a quarter of a century after the end of apartheid, teaching South African students about this dark period remains difficult. Educators must strike the right balance between emotion and history. And for students, these stories of suffering and identity can easily turn into pain or anger.
These South African students are in history class, but it's not just any history class. Today, the students at this sought-after girls' school in Cape Town are learning about the apartheid. They may be too young to have lived through the 46-year period of racial divide, but it still casts a shadow over their lives.
I still feel kind of guilty sometimes that this happened. Like, I don't have any I didn't do anything directly, but it's just, I mean, like, as a country. There's a lot of stuff that we don't talk about because we think it's too heavy of a topic, but really it is a discussion that needs to happen.
Teaching history is not mandatory at all ages in South African schools. For the final 3 high school grades, the choice of whether to teach it and how to teach it is left to the discretion of individual establishments. 100 kilometres to the east in the village of Worcester, another apartheid history class is underway. But here, the focus is also on the modern day and lingering signs of division.
If you go, it's about 500 meters from here. You say a shanty town, but when you go to white areas, you don't see them. So that's part of the question they will be asking you. Why are we like living like this and them like this? So it's still the Likas.
During his class, Milton Changwa recounts tales of his day-to-day life under the apartheid. Certain stories resonate with his pupils today.
It's just smooth right now because nobody is like standing against it so that like it doesn't get exposed, if you know what I'm trying to say. But facing the fact that whites are still superior than blacks. Look at like blacks owned businesses. How many black owned businesses do you know, man? If you know what I'm trying to say.
The ruling party in South Africa wants to make history lessons compulsory across all ages. It's hoped that a greater understanding of past injustices will help the country get closer to Nelson Mandela's dream of a united rainbow nation.
That's all for this edition, but don't go away. There's more news coming up next.
He drew portraits for Italian dukes. He painted for popes, and he died in the court of a French king. He was an artist who defied borders, who crossed the Alps from Italy to France with his most famous work, the Mona Lisa on the back of a donkey. This year marks 500 years since the death of Leonardo da Vinci. Join us as we explore his cosmopolitan legacy.
Encore, presented by Eve Jackson on France 24 and France24.com.